Hey, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm very excited to have you here. Quick note, I've had a tickle in my throat all day, so I'm going to hope it doesn't happen while I'm going live here, but no promises. But again, thank you so much for joining. Welcome to the LinkedIn Live series, Leading in the Moment with Geronda. And today we're actually going to dive into a really critical topic, something that is really important for a lot of leaders or even those that are not people managers to really start to think about because there's a really direct impact that this is going to have on your work life culture. And so what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be diving into the correlation between honesty, trust, and the creation of psychologically safe spaces. So before I go into that, um, I want you to put live in the chat if you're tuning in live. If you are not, totally cool, and you're tuning in for the replay, please put replay in the chat. So very excited to go into this topic with you about honesty and trust for psychologically safe spaces. Now, before I do that, I really like to ask a question for anyone who's tuning in, just get to know people a little bit more, lighten the mood. I know it's 5 o'clock for me on the East Coast. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for folks on uh, Pacific time, 4 o'clock Mountain time, lots of different time zones that we're going through today. But the question I want to ask is, for those of you who have celebrated different holidays at different times throughout the year. Maybe I know Canada had Thanksgiving a month or so, many months ago. In the United States, we had Thanksgiving last week. There's different holidays that people like to celebrate. And so, what is a really big tradition that you have for something that you celebrate? And maybe it's not a holiday, maybe it's just an occasion or an event that you celebrate. And you have this tradition around it. So for me, one big tradition that my wife and I have is every anniversary, we buy a small chocolate cake. We don't have any plates, we have nothing. We just take a fork and we go to town. Now, don't judge us. It's actually very good. It's a really amazing experience to go through, and I highly recommend it for anybody who's looking to do something like that. But I know that there's really cool traditions out there, and I love to learn about the different traditions around the world or even just different cultures and backgrounds. So really would love your comments and input on that. All right, so the topic, honesty and trust for psychologically safe spaces. Now I want to go into the definitions because it can be really hard to conceptualize something like this without thinking about defining and breaking it down and breaking it apart, really. So I want to start there. And I have a framework that I'd like to share with all of you. So give me one moment as I pull this up. And let's see. Dun, dun, dun. But basically, this is a framework that's going to define and help us to focus on psychological safety. So give me a moment because maybe we can't do this. Maybe I cannot share my full screen when I'm looking to share. Yep, here we go. Figured it out. Look at that, patience. So with this model, it's something that I was having a really great conversation with one of my clients about psychological safety. And like me, they are very visual. I'm a very visual person. I need to see things to really understand it and put it into frame for myself. So when you think of psychological safety, it's really once a member of your team is confident that they belong and feel safe to make mistakes, create value, and be candid about the change that could be happening in your organization, and that trust is going to spread all across aspects of the work life. But really, to achieve psychological safety, there needs to be honesty, and honesty influences trust. Trust is the response. If I trust you as a response, I'm going to be more honest in things like feedback, innovation, ideas. And with honesty comes vulnerability and integrity. because it's being vulnerable to set the example as leaders for your teams. And trust being the response is then authenticity and empathy to be more collective and collaborative and high performing as teams. So, this framework that I've put together in this visual really helps conceptualize this a little bit easier for those who are newer to this topic, or maybe those that have been wondering, how do you frame this in a way that makes sense? So I'm glad that I got to share this with you quickly, and going back into the frame here. So again, if you are with me, put live in the chat. If you are watching the recording, put in recording. Either way is totally fine. So let's define honesty. When you think about honesty, it's really emphasizing that it's more than just truth telling. It's not all just about telling the truth and being honest about something. It's more about transparency and there being sincerity in that transparency, and that ethical behavior in excuse me, how you communicate. So some examples of this as a leader would look like, do you share good and bad news transparently? And is it consistent? And is it also in a way that is empathetic to the audience that you're sharing it to? Or do you offer praise when it's due and address the areas that need improvement with intent to help grow your team? I say with intent because there are a lot of times where leaders are sharing something with their team or an individual in their team as an area of improvement, but in the way that it's shared can oftentimes be out of frustration. There could be a lot of negative emotion behind it. Maybe there's an environment of stress that's making you do things in this way, and you might not be aware of how you're going about doing this. But being very clear and open in how you're going about it, the intent should be to help grow the team. And now some leaders oftentimes will say, well, my style is I need to be very direct. There is a difference between being kind and direct and being direct and having a bad ill intent. So reflecting on that. And then respecting confidentiality. What I hear a lot are things like, we're going to get a survey and we're going to do an engagement survey to see how people feel. But we want to share the information and the data of what people are saying. And there is an experience where confidentiality and anonymity is broken. So now trust has been broken. And leaders there was actually an actual situation that this happened where somebody specifically had names, identities, a lot of information visible that really breached confidentiality for folks who took the engagement surveys. And it took a very long time to rebuild trust back to want to do those types of things again. And that's understandable. I wouldn't want people knowing all this information about me and that I'm talking about the organization, or especially if I'm in an organization where trust is really not built there yet, because there's such a fear of retaliation and losing your job if you say something that goes against the majority. So it can be really, really, really detrimental. The intent is really important there. So honesty, again, it's not just the truth telling, it's about transparency, sincerity, and ethical behaviors and how you communicate. Now, trust, on the other hand, it's the foundation of relationships. It's built through that consistent behavior, reliability, and integrity. So when you think about, like, if you're in a relationship or even if you're single, you've heard trust is the most important thing, or communication is the most important thing in a relationship. And I can attest to that as somebody who's married. Trust is very, very important. And that's through a lot of consistent behavior. So if I'm saying all these terrible things about my wife and it just continues to happen, there's no consequence for my behaviors, I'm not willing to change. Although I'm doing a consistent behavior, it's a negative impact that's going to happen to my marriage. If I'm consistent in admitting, oh, I made this mistake, it was pretty terrible, I said this thing, I'm so sorry, and I work to consistently change that behavior and reduce the amount of times it happens again, that is a completely different experience. So thinking about that, so what does this look like in terms of an example? So it is that consistency in your actions and behaviors. but also explaining the reason behind decisions. There were so many layoffs that happened this year with a lot of different things that were going on with the economy and inflation, DEI having affirmative action in schools and colleges, and there's some fear that it's going to universities. There's been a lot that's been going on. And there have been thousands upon thousands of employees that did not understand or get a clear, definitive answer as to why they were laid off. Now imagine you might have children, you might have just bought a house, you might have someone like a parent or a spouse that you're caring for, and you're laid off. You have no idea. It surprises you. You never expected this to happen. There's no just explanation to the backing of this decision. Now, getting laid off, honestly, it sucks. I've been laid off in my career. It's tough, but I think it's a very different feeling when there is empathy and there is backing and understanding behind the decision. So I was laid off at one time, and it sucked, but there was a good reasoning, and it was we have to restructure. Finances just really aren't out there. I hate that I have to do this. I don't really want to do this, but unfortunately, in the state of where we are as a company, this is what has to happen as a result. I made this decision because looking at the market, looking at where things are, we just will not be sustainable over time. And we just did not plan well as an organization. It was not as devastatingly detrimental as the one time that I was laid off, and I was very surprised, and there was no understanding of why. And it was just like, this is your last day, turn in your stuff, have a good day. My trust was completely broken with that company versus the other one. So, consistency in your behaviors, reasonings behind your decisions, and believe in your team's ability. But this is where checking your bias also comes in. You can believe in your team's ability, but are you really putting the right people behind different projects? Are you going for the same people that are similar to you and putting them behind projects? Why are you not allowing more promotional opportunities for those that are more marginalized? There's a lot of things really to consider. So I know I said quite a bit. Defined honesty, defined trust. If you are with me right now and you're live, please put live in the chat. If you're watching the replay, put replay. But now I want to go into defining psychological safety. There's a lot of different definitions that are out there, and I really think it's important to give the definition that makes sense for people to take in, because there are sometimes those very um, too detailed professional definitions. It's like when you go to the doctor's office and they give a diagnosis, or they give you all the information that you need to know about your visit. And there's a lot of big words and things, and you find like you're Googling more about it than you normally should be. Then you're on like WebMD, and it's the whole thing. I digress. I've been there. But psychological safety, I think this is a definition that I feel a lot of leaders and people can resonate with, and it's easy to take in. So psychological safety is an environment where individuals feel safe to express themselves, to take risks, and be vulnerable without the fear of, um, of retaliation or judgment. So, what does this look like in an example? I might have a an idea that I want to bring to the company, and maybe I want to bring it to the vice president of HR. We'll say random example. um, I may disagree with something that's happened, and I might say, well, I don't know that I agree with that idea that the VP of HR has. I actually have an idea that maybe will fit better, but I may not share it because I might feel like if I share this thing, they're going to discredit me, or I'm going to feel like I'm not going to be able to keep my job. And you know that you're in an environment like that when you don't hear much from your team. Your team's not giving you ideas. They're kind of just churning and not taking things into the next level. There's that there's fear on both sides. There's fear as a leader of, am I doing the right things? Am I motivating my team? Am I getting them to engage? And then there's also fear of, if I share this thing, they're gonna get really upset because past behavior has shown that they don't take ideas well, it's more their way or the highway. It's just a lot of different factors that go into it. So it's thinking about, are you creating those spaces between honesty and trust? Are people being honest enough with you where they feel like they can trust you in a way that they're not feeling like they're going to lose their job or be judged for it? And this happens a lot with people who are from marginalized groups. So really, trust is a pillar of psychological safety. It's one of those foundational elements of psychological safety. And when trust exists, individuals feel secure enough to be themselves and share ideas without fear. And there's so many studies that show that psychological safety really truly can increase revenue for your organization. It can innovate ideas and make you have a more competitive advantage. But as a leader, you need to show more honesty by setting the example of sharing your mistakes, showing the integrity, to be able to get trust from people, to feel like they can be themselves and share more of those different ideas and just be there for your team. Because if this doesn't happen, then people are not going to express their ideas and thoughts. They're not really going to admit their mistakes and they might continue to make errors. They might not set examples, or you as a leader may not set examples, and they may not trust you as a leader. So there's different strategies that you can go about this. You can encourage that model of honesty and transparency and vulnerability, really setting that tone for trust, being honest about how you're feeling. Maybe you're nervous about this inflation, what's going on, how are others feeling? Maybe you don't know the answer to something, and that's okay. And saying, I really didn't consider that or think about that. I'm going to get the information for you. And emphasizing inclusivity and diversity where people feel valued and heard. Listen to the data, listen to surveys, deploy surveys, have regular check ins with your teams to be able to really get an understanding of how they're feeling and what's going on. And having one on ones with your teams, if you're not having them already, that also can give you some inclination of how they might be feeling. If they're not sharing ideas, or if you're asking them, how are you feeling? What's going on? Oh, things are great. Ask more, probe for more things. Because without honesty and without trust, you are not going to have psychologically safe spaces, and it's really going to impact the culture of your organization. And it's going to be very hard for you to start to hire people, the right people, to work in your organization too. So I'm going to show this one more time. The one graphic that I had created. When your team members feel confident that they belong and they feel safe to make mistakes, to create value, and be candid about change, that is when trust can spread across all aspects of work life in your organization. But it comes with honesty, being honest first. So being vulnerable, showing integrity to then build that trust and people being more authentic and sharing what they need. Without honesty, you really can't have trust. It gets very, very difficult to achieve that. So I want to thank you all so much for sticking with me today to go through psychological safety and how honesty and trust are direct links for psychological safety. And I'm going to be putting out some polling for other topics around these areas that would be significantly helpful for all of you. So please be on the lookout for all of those. And thank you again for joining. I really hope that this gives you time to reflect on, are you being vulnerable? Are you being honest? Are you building those spaces? Are you being consistent? And really the rewards that are going to come from just starting in this work. It takes time. It's not an overnight. It's not something that's overnight that's going to change right away or rapidly, but you have to start somewhere and evaluating how you go about this approach. So I'm Duranda Wallach-Spiller. Thank you so much for joining me. The next leading in the oh, I told you I had a tickle in my throat. I gotta get something. The next, my wife is laughing at me in another room, not even trying to help me. Do you see how this is? Marriage. The next leading in the moment is going to be happening on Wednesday, December 13th. Again, I do have to change this time, but it is 2 p.m. Pacific and it is 5 p.m. Eastern. So I'd love to see you at the next one if you're able to make it. And let me just do this again. 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The topics are going to revolve around psychological safety and the different aspects of it. And I'd love to hear more about ones that you think would be helpful to engage in and learn more about. So with that, have a great evening. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I will be talking to all of you very soon. Have a great one, everybody.